It feels like as soon as MPs went on summer vacation, things just got crazier. My dog Dozer agrees. You think so, buddy? I think so too. The story that we have been hearing about, the story that's got crazy, the one that people have been talking about since the beginning of the week, it only got crazier to the end of this week, and that is the BC Ferries. The ferries that are not built in Canada, the ferries that aren't using Canadian manufacturing. No, the ferries that we're using in China. We're buying from China. We are getting it from Chinois. That is where we're getting it from these days, and it is absolutely crazy. But also not surprising. Elbows up for China, baby. That's what we do. We act on China's behest to be combative with the United States, and we'll always roll out the red carpet for good old China. So that's the first story. Second story is, well, the elections commissioners come out and says, no foreign interference, no exterior forces, no nothing really had any impact on the results of the election. It's all good. It was all, we only had an increase in complaints, but it had no impact on the election. So that's the second story we're covering today. There's this and so much more. Welcome to the Elevate Podcast. I'm your host, Josh. I'm gratefully back on with you once again. If you get anything from this podcast, if you get anything from the show, feel free to like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already. Helps the show to grow, especially during summertime where people are taking some time off, disconnecting from news, which I totally get. I actually encourage that. I just did that myself. But it also helps kind of make sure those videos are there waiting for people when they're coming back from vacation. They want to get caught up in everything that's been going on. Now let's get to the first story, shall we? The story that we're fairly familiar with. Premier David Eby decided to not use a Canadian manufacturer, decided to not use any of our Canadian shipyards to have 4 new ferries built. No, he decided to give the contract to the Chinese shipyard. And a lot of people are up in arms about this, especially since, well, didn't we just go through this whole phase in the past few months about we were going to put Canada first. We're going to put Canada manufacturing first. We're going to put Canadian jobs first. But we all campaigned on that. And some of these premiers campaigned on behalf of parties on that issue. And then David Eby turns around and says, well, it wasn't too convenient to have a Canadian manufacturer do this. So we needed China to do this one. And then we heard from Chrystia Freeland, who is the transport minister now, who has now been, demoted from finance minister. And she penned a strongly worded letter to David Eby saying this is just not acceptable. We need to look into this. This is not good for Canada. This is not good for our workers. We need to rethink this. So that was fascinating. Then the news that broke today that the Canadian Infrastructure Bank gave $1 billion to David Eby and this project to get it funded. And the CIB, which was first erected in 2017, to essentially be there as the bank to help give funding and give money to Canadian projects to get Canadian infrastructure built. In this case, they sent $1 billion in financing to a Chinese shipyard to get 4 ferries built to send over to BC. That's where their funds were used. And so when you think about the CIB, it is a crown corporation. It is arm's length from the government. However, they are constantly updating the government, i.e. the transport minister in this case, on what might be happening. They are always kind of informing all the ministers who are covering the various different portfolios that they are overseeing. Well, the CIB will always be sure to communicate of what's going on and where funds are going. So that's why it was kind of funny to hear Chrystia Freeland say, no, this is so disappointing. We should be putting Canadian jobs first. Quite frankly, likely, Chrystia Freeland knew about this the whole time. She likely rubber stamped it. She knew about this whole time. And this is politics for you here in Canada, but just in general. Politics are ugly. Politics are not fun. People are always putting on one face and saying another thing. And this was the perfect situation of that happening. Chrystia Freeland wanted to save political face, to make it look like she's standing up for Canadians. Now she's got caught. It's like you likely rubber stamped $1 billion to go to this project. You knew where it was going. You knew what David Eby wanted. And you said, yeah, I think it's a good idea to put $1 billion of federal money into a project to build ships that are built in a Chinese shipyard and then sent over back to BC. We just saw you enter a leadership race saying elbows up for Canada. We just saw you help support a prime minister candidate saying elbows up. Now it's all of a sudden not elbows up. This is going in the detail of Miss Freeland's letter to David Eby. It says the letter referenced a previous $75 million loan by the CIB for 4 other ferries and Ottawa's annual grant for ferry operations, but did not mention that the bank is also providing $1 billion in low interest loans, 1.8% to be exact, which is well below market rate. the specific purchase that she was criticizing. The letter also called on Mr. Farnworth to verify and confirm with utmost certainty that no federal funding will be diverted to support the acquisition of these new ferries. In a statement to the Globe and Mail, CIB spokesperson Hilary Marshall confirmed the bank's financing for the project, but said the CIB is not involved in BC Ferries' decisions related to awarding contracts. The bank is planning to formally announce its involvement Thursday. Relying on a Chinese shipyard at a time when Canadian political leaders are vowing to boost support for Canadian manufacturers has generated considerable controversy since the contract was first announced by BC Ferries on June 10th. Ms. Freeland's letter says China has imposed unjustified tariffs on Canada, including 100% tariffs on canola oil, meal, and pea imports. She later added that there have been ongoing concerns regarding threats to security, including cybersecurity, from China. Mr. Farnworth distanced the BC government from the decision within hours of the announcement, saying he was worried about procuring ships from any country that is actively harming the Canadian economy with tariffs. And just to give you an idea of who Mr. Farnworth is, he is the Minister of Transportation for BC at the provincial level. So him and Chrystia Freeland likely be doing some conversations, having some chats about these issues. But everyone involved in this was doing a lot of this. That person's fault, her fault, his fault, their fault. No one's owning the fact that it was just easier to buy from China. It was just easier to do so. However, even though we have multiple shipyards in this country, the problem is manufacturing for our shipyards is actually pretty high. There's a lot of work to go around, and there's a lot of backlog at this certain time. And this all comes down to poor planning by the BC at the provincial level. This comes down to not willing to put Canadian workers first, especially since BC has their own shipyards. And it just all around looks terrible, especially when a Chinese government who has been actively harming our country in more ways than one, not just on tariffs, but also funding and funneling and aiding the drug trafficking here in this country. It's all around bad. It's an ugly looking situation. Even Premier David Eby said publicly, I had no other choice. His exact words were, I had no other choice. We had to go with China. You weren't upfront about it. You were hoping that it would just kind of slide under the radar. Miss Freeland tried to make sure it slid under the radar. Then when it came to the surface, she'd be like, I didn't know anything about it, even though I probably signed all the papers and so reviewed all the papers when it came to the funding for this thing. But this is politics in Canada. And it's important for shows like ours to continue to call it out, continue to be very loud on these issues. And in the meantime, it's important for us to be very vocal about it as well, because what's going to happen this summer, and I can already tell this is where it's going based on all the stories I've seen up to this point, is yes, House of Commons is on vacation. MPs are back in their ridings. But you know, Mark Carney's working a lot of deals. He's working a lot of backroom deals. He's working a lot of weird things behind the scenes that I would love to take summer off. However, based on stuff like this, yeah, I ain't going to be going anywhere anytime soon. I know that the viewership is going to be drastically limited this summer because, well, people are normal. People want their lives. People are on summer vacation. Kids are out of school. Boom, boom. I get it. 100%. I totally get that's the ebbs and flows of this game. But my goal and my job is to make sure all the content is here for when people get back and they get re-engaged, because this stuff is wild. And speaking of wild, our second story. Canadian Press article. No evidence federal election was affected by foreign interference, commissioner says. Canada's Elections Commissioner said Wednesday she has no evidence to suggest the federal election result in April was affected by foreign interference, disinformation, or voter intimidation, even though the volume of complaints about the campaign shot way up. In a parliamentary report, Commissioner Caroline Simmert said her office received more than 16,000 complaints about the spring campaign that ended on April 28th, 7 times the number of complaints received in 2019 and 2021. And while Simmert's office said some of those numbers are due to amplification, multiple complaints about the same issue, the number of complaints about foreign interference, artificial intelligence, disinformation, and voter intimidation was lower than her office had expected. Okay, well, that's subjective. So far, based on our initial observations and the information we have, there's no evidence to suggest the election outcome was affected in any way. Simmert said in a news release she was not available for the interview Wednesday. In a statement issued to the Canadian Press, her office said things like elections advertising, false statements, allegations related to voting, photos of marked ballots would all have been areas where we observed some degree of amplification. Simmer's office had closed about 2,300 files at the end of April, with another 16,000 still to go. Simmer's office said several complaints it received suggested mistaken beliefs about what is actually illegal in elections, or a misunderstanding of which section of the Canada Elections Act was broken. For that reason, it is important to note that these preliminary figures represent raw data that are subject to change over time. And you see the nuance. You see the work that they're doing on this. They are talking about direct, clear-cut issues of foreign interference, clear-cut issues of disinformation. Anything that was kind of like, it could be on the edge, it's kind of in the gray, they don't count that. In that case, since there wasn't any serious black and white issues, no impact on the election. The things that we do talk about, the things that are tangible from our perspective, is the fact that, I don't know, specific storylines being pushed in the media versus other ones. Specific transgressions of certain politicians are amplified more than other ones. If this is not an issue of black and white, this is the problem. Is, of course, the Commissioner of the Elections Canada can come out and say, oh, there was no issues. We have no evidence that anything bad happened. Because, well, yeah, there was no serious, on a huge level, black and white problem. However, it was the intangibles. It was what you can see through messaging and media had a significant impact on this election. When you have Mark Carney coming out several times saying Trump is going to take our resources. He wants to conquer us. He wants to break us. Boom. Was any of that true? No. Was a lot of it hyperbole? Yes. Did we know a lot of it was hyperbole? Yes. But can you factually prove that during that election? It's hard to put your finger on it, but you know it to feel it, you see it. You know what I'm saying? And that's the stuff that Elections Canada is not touching. That's the stuff that Elections Canada will not talk about. And that is, quite frankly, the issue. Is we saw the meddling in our elections. We saw how egregious the media class was throughout the election and how they kept pushing constant narratives that had been debunked over and over and over again on Poilievre. For example, security clearance. That had been cleared up so many times, but they kept bringing it up, kept bringing it up, kept bringing it up. They may have only brought up, I don't know, Carney's financial interests twice, maybe 2 or 3 times early on, but then they moved on from it right away as soon as Carney got a little too testy on it. These are the things that people call out. And even our media didn't call out Mark Carney's lies or hyperbole, but they are quick to do it with Poilievre. And these are the intangibles. These are the little things that impact elections. You can't point to it on a piece of paper. You can't point to it on a drawing board and say, this is where it went wrong. This is where the chart went up. But that's not what you can do. But dissemination of information during an election to sway public opinion, we know we saw that. We saw it happen. Lots of disinformation. We even had a group whose whole goal was to make sure Poilievre didn't get in. And they were funded to the tune of millions of dollars. Nothing. They are not being looked into. They're not being discussed. That's how this game is played. That's how it all goes. And I was on a podcast the other night with Kushal, who runs the Carvaka podcast. And he is Indian origin, but spends half his time in Canada. And great guy. You should check out his stuff. Check out our interview. We're probably going to have him on the show fairly soon to show you kind of what he's all about, because he's very, very conservative. Actually, he's more libertarian, if anything. But he asked the idea of how Canada seems to be very obsessed with the talk of foreign interference, but they don't do anything about foreign interference. What's that about? And he made the point that Trudeau talked about it while he was prime minister, that we are a post-nationalist state. As soon as you admit, as soon as you brag that you're a post-nationalist state, at that point, national security is no longer a thing. You don't have the right to complain about national security. And this is where we're currently at, is we had Trudeau and the Liberals say that we're a post-nationalist state. Then all of a sudden, when it got convenient and Trump was doing his thing, all of a sudden, they wrapped themselves in the flag real quick and said, we are Canadian. We believe in nationalism. Yep. Ooh. Oh, Canada. But as soon as some serious foreign interference was taking place, they weren't looking into it. They didn't even touch China. But as soon as someone like Chandra Arya was in the way of Mark Carney and that riding, oh, I don't know, Chandra Arya, he's been doing some stuff with India. We got to kick him out. We got to kick him to the curb. And there's another point that was made, is you had concerns about Chandra Arya having allegiances to India, However, the man with 3 passports who was running for prime minister, that's not a foreign interference issue. That's not a problem. Okay. This is the issue. This is the problem that I have, and I'll continue to make very, very clear. These are the stupid games these people play. These are the stupid games these politicians play. And this is what you have to call out when stuff like no evidence a federal election was affected by foreign interference comes up. What were you actually looking at? We have multiple countries, even CSIS brought up in their 2024 report of all the countries that are trying to impact our institutions. And you're going to say they had no impact on our elections? Not even a riot, just one rioting? No impact? 5 countries. Iran, Pakistan, India, Russia, China. All some of the major players, some of them being major players in our world economy. And he said, nothing happened here. No, something did happen here. And we're going to keep getting down to the bottom of it and keep talking about it until it all comes out so that we can make sure that our elections are always 100% safe. And that whatever the result is, you can rest assured that is the result and you can live with it. And again, I'm not saying that there was so significant foreign interference that swayed the election results. However, there was some weird stuff happening in our elections, period. And people need to be open and be okay to ask questions, especially when you find out how many countries are trying to mess with our government institutions in this country. But anyways, have yourselves a good one. I'm out.